Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nyambura and this is 100 on Books. Today I'm going to be talking about the 3 books I finished in the week ending 26th November 2022. So the first of those I finished was A Lie Someone Told You About Yourself by Peter Ho Davies. This is a story whose narrator is a man who was hey, I'm trying to find the right words to describe this. So this man has a wife. He and his wife went in for some genetic testing when she got pregnant, and they found out that the child had some sort of issue, and they elected to have an abortion. And so he spends the entirety of the novel grappling with what it means to have made that choice, especially when they end up having a child, like having, like a pregnancy that goes to term, and the child they have is written as autistic, or at least, on the autism spectrum. And so he's sort of grappling with what it means to have had an abortion. It really feels so odd for me to say that, what it feels to have been part of the decision to have an abortion, more or less, and especially because he is a man. Like, we're not culturally trained to think of men as the people who grapple with an abortion. And so he takes on all of these different modes to deal with this reality. He works as an escort at some point at an abortion clinic, grapples with that. He writes a short story. He's a writer. He's actually a teacher of writing. He spends a lot of time really ruminating on what being a father means, what it means to be the father of a child who, doesn't fit perfectly in with society's ideas of childhood, or especially with childhood in their particular milieu. But again and again, we keep returning to this abortion. That he grapples with the fact that there is an emotional component to what he imagined, I think, that would be just medical decision. I truly have never read a book where abortion is written about from a man's perspective, and actually in the novel the narrator details a number of books where abortion is mentioned, or where abortion is sort of at the heart of the narrative, all of which are by women, or at least not by men, not by cis men. And yeah, so this was different. But on the other hand, on some levels, I kept agreeing with the narrator's wife, like, why are you making this about you? And yet having to stop that impulse on my part and saying, hey, how is it not about him? Like, I mean, he is this woman's partner. This was a child who was wanted, and it was not an easy decision for them to make. And there is a continuous element of regret that's threaded through this novel. This notion that maybe this baby would have been this or that or the other. Maybe the pregnancy they ended would have turned out to have been a baby who was X or Y or Z. And while it doesn't really address the issues of saying, like a medically warranted, there's no other way to put it, at least for me, abortion, one that has to do with genetic issues or whatever. Like, it doesn't really wrestle with those dynamics or with those ethical concerns. I think it's an interesting conversation piece, this book. Like, I think if you were thinking about abortion, or thinking about how we, and by we I mean people in the world, sort of have like a continuum of abortion. Somebody in the novel calls the abortion his wife had a virtuous abortion. And I think it was interesting for me in reading this novel to think about that for instance, people who experience certain violent interactions are thought of as worthy of abortions, and not all the time, as one can see in a lot of countries, including the US. But that even within the realm of non-violent pregnancies, like pregnancies that do not result from like violence or coercion or something like that, um, there's still this notion of virtuous and non-virtuous abortions. And like, what does it mean for us to shift or at least evolve the way we right, where was I? Yeah, what does it mean for us to shift the way we think and talk about abortion and so on? It was an interesting novel. And again, I don't quite remember how I came upon this. It might have been seeing someone's update on Goodreads, but eh, I found it quite an interesting novel. The next one I read was a graphic novel by Jason Reynolds called Ain't Burned All the Bright, with artwork by Jason Griffin. Now, this book's artwork, chef's kiss, like, it's phenomenal. Honestly, sorry, I leaned forward because I wanted to check that I was still recording. Yeah, this book's artwork is phenomenal. I mean, I started reading it and I turned to Dawn. I was with Dawn and I was like, "Ugh, I think you'll love this book. At the very least, you will enjoy the artwork because it's very beautifully rendered. And considering how heavy the topic is, because it's a book that's set during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, with all that happened in the US to black people. So as you may recall, the protests, like Black Lives Matter protests, protests against the extrajudicial killings of black people. And this was happening in the face of disproportionate deaths by black people, disproportionate deaths of black people from the coronavirus. And so the book grapples with, yeah, this particular environment. And because it's also told from a child's perspective, there's a certain innocence and a certain, like, energy to the book that's really heart trending, but also in some ways beautiful. Like, thinking about the fact that black people, a lot of whom, even in the black world, which is where I live myself, like I live in a country that's majority black, encounter a lot of anti-blackness, and yet there's all of this beauty in our connections and our stories and our relationships and so on. And yeah, it's for a book that literally involves someone not being able to breathe. Is It's just a strange delight is the only way I can put it, because it's not one of those books where you're like, I had a great time, but it's also not depressing. Also, I started a Storygraph account. This is important because of what I'm about to say. So if you're interested in the content warnings for any of the books I'm talking about today, but also specifically about this one, please head there. I feel like Storygraph does a really good job of detailing those. And then lastly, I finished Sisters in Hate, American Women on the Front Lines of White Nationalism by Darby and read by Susan Bennett. I picked up this book because of a recent video where Ashley over at Bookish Realm posted, some tips on how to get into nonfiction, but also some recommendations, and this was one of the books she'd recommended. And I remembered when she read it months ago, maybe years ago at this point. So I finally picked it up and whoop! Listen, I mean, it's... Is there hate everywhere in the world? Yes. Does hate on a structural and individual level have material effects? Yes. But also I think it was really odd. Not odd because these things aren't exactly like new. Like it's not, oh, I did not know this before. But it's also just really interesting to see the ways in which these women in, sorry, or white nationalist spaces essentially leverage their womanhood for the, the ends of more than anything anti-blackness, like and anti-immigrant sentiments, and anti-indigenous sentiments and all that. Like it is a lot to take in. So maybe I should go back and talk about what this book is about. So in this book, Sayward Darby talks to three women. Like the three main characters in the book are these three white women, two of whom are still in one way or another involved in the world of white supremacy and so on, and one who's disavowed that world and has even converted to Islam. This is significant because Islamophobia is one of those, themes within the white nationalist world. And yeah, she really sort of details the ways in which these women come to these sentiments, but also how they're so integrated into a certain way of white living in America that there are probably lots of people who are consuming media that is made with a very white supremacist angle, a white supremacist goal, who do not perceive it as such. So I essentially really thought about the way she talks about this notion of trad wife discourse, traditional wife discourse, and how this tradition looks a very certain sort of way, even though the traditions that power this notion of trad wives are traditions that disempower women, which take away hard-won rights and so on. But also a reminder that white women highly regard their whiteness. They highly value their whiteness and the innocence and quote unquote protection that whiteness grants them. And so they will vote literally and figuratively against non-white women in order to retain this access to whiteness. And Darby really covers a lot of ground, like historic ground, and considering this was an audiobook, I found the way it was written, the way it was read, really great, because with a lot of audiobooks, and I remember having this conversation with Sean over at Sean the Book Maniac. I remember telling him how I often feel like if you're reading nonfiction, if you're listening to nonfiction, you miss out on a lot of footnotes and bibliographies and things like those. And I probably missed out on the biblio on this book, but the footnotes are really well rendered. And this is also important because Susan Bennett is the same. No, it wasn't Susan Bennett, but I have listened to a book that Susan Bennett has narrated recently. I was about to say Susan Bennett was the same one who narrated. Then I remembered it wasn't her. But maybe that's what I should do, a roundup of the audiobook narrators I have listened to this year. Anyway, let's go back to the topic at hand. Yeah, so the notes were really well rendered and I enjoyed listening to the book on the whole. It was really upsetting at times because, these are racists. They're white supremacists. And so they talk about non-white people in very specific ways. And I don't know if y'all can tell, but I'm not white. And so, yeah, it can get us unsettling. So that's something to think about going into the book. But I think it's also really illuminating because I remember my brother and I were having a conversation about how easily the rabbit holes we go on in the internet can lead us to some pretty extremist, misogynistic, homophobic, etc. corners of the internet just by sort of going down and being led there by your specific interests and so on. And so, yeah, it sort of also served as an interesting reminder about the vigilance one needs going into media consumption. But also a reminder that, women are not the same. Like, I think this is a constant conversation in feminist circles. Like, class, race, age, nationality, and all of those things affect the way we interact with the world and affect our worldviews and our politics and so on. So that's it for this week. It was an interesting week. I was gripped by Sisters in Hate. I really enjoyed the illustrations in Ink Band, All the Brights, and I was left with a lot of thoughts by the time I was done with A Lie Someone Told You About Yourself. So, a good week overall. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and all the good things. And I will see you soon. Bye.